Essentially, I think a midwife will be best used in this like new world as a spiritual guide. And again, I'm not saying we don't need skills and all of that, but this focus on the old model where, let's be honest, we can do no right. And you just said it. You're like, it's getting worse for midwives. We won't ever be right. Like, it's just not a model I can participate in trying to change. It's like a sinking fucking ship.
Morning from the other side of the world. With
Yeah.
Leslie. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
It's an honor. Well, for people that don't know who you are, I don't know how they wouldn't know because you are very prominent online and you've made such a mark and such a name for yourself. But let's do an introduction anyway, just in case. Maryn, tell us who you are, where you are, and what you're all about.
Yeah. Introductions are always so interesting, I think, aren't they? It's just what you choose to say, what
Excellent.
comes forward,
Yeah.
yeah, at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I usually say primarily I'm a mother because
Mm-hmm.
that feels right these days. I have 10 children here on this planet, and 8 of them are like with me all the time, and the 2 are older. And other than that, I consider myself probably some kind of trailblazer, as I'm sure you do in the birth world, and wear all kinds of hats from midwife to educator to copywriter some days, depending on what is happening, you know? So I'm honored to be here with you and just see where our chat goes.
Me too. Thanks for that. Yeah, I have oftentimes shortened my bio down to just 3 words: midwife, mentor, muse. Because
Mm.
I think we do have so many titles and so many hats and so many pathways. It's like, who do I actually want to be and who do I want to be known for? And mother is one for you for sure. An educator, you said.
Yeah.
And what else? What was the other thing you said?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like whatever's coming in right now. I would say those two, and business owner
Yeah,
and
entrepreneur.
partner,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, hopefully someone that can help inspire other people. I think that feels most important most days. Not that I'm trying that per se, but just speaking my own truth and having that land where it lands, kind of no matter what the topic is the way to do it.
That's awesome. Well, you said when we just started, you said, we'll see what is happening and what comes up. And I feel like I want that to be the main kind of theme of our conversation because there is so much up in the world of birth right now.
Mm.
And I feel like there's a collective surge that I feel like I can sort of see and hear. And I think one of my colleagues, Hannah Dahlen from Western Sydney University, maybe really gets this as well. About a year and a half, 2.5 years ago, she wrote, gosh, maybe it was 4 years ago now. She wrote a really seminal, or I think, edited a seminal work called "Birthing Outside the System: The Canary in the Coal Mine,"
Mm.
and she made this really beautiful and important point. Like canaries used to be carried down with the coal miners and they stop chirping, then they're dying of noxious fumes. Like they're the bellwether. They're telling us if we're still safe or not.
Yeah.
And the rise of community-based birth, birthing outside the system, free births, traditional midwives. I don't know, there's a lot of different nomenclature, but all of that, she was sort of warning the medical establishment, saying, like, this is the canary, like it's not going well for you, hence all these people are exiting. And she really saw that work in Australia, but of course it's global. Actually, this is happening everywhere because of a sort of awakening about the violence in obstetrics, the neglect, the abuse, and the real patriarchal, patronizing, ignoring that is happening. And you've been at the front of this. You founded IndieBirth in what year?
Technically, gosh, it was probably back in like 2007, but it has come a long way from a print magazine to, an online site that featured birth stories. I would say the real inception of the energy that is IndieBirth was about 2012 or so.
That's what I was thinking too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you like indie birth, and I assume is a little bit nod to independent, correct? Much like indie films, right?
Yeah, definitely. And the definition we came up with, and I always have to try to get the words right, is a birth decision or birth decisions made in alignment with one's individual truth, autonomous and free. So, I like to bring that up when I can because it's actually not really about home birth per se. It's actually not really about midwifery, even though all of those things start to circle in at the core. It's more about our sovereignty as birthing women, if that applies, but then also as the midwife, that we are, all sovereign beings. And that was important to me that long ago. So that's still really important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you were at the forefront of this, really kind of being that bellwether, saying you don't have to accept what you're being told. And I think what maybe has made you a controversial figure, tell me if I'm wrong, is that you continued that messaging beyond the system and even said that outside the system. Like you don't have to accept midwives who do this or that. You don't even have to have midwives. What am I saying that correctly?
I think there's truth to sort of all the angles, and I think that's where it gets messy is I've never been a black or white person, and I don't think IndieBirth is either. So there is a lot of nuance, and I think there's a lot of confusion when we are nuanced. So, do we support free birth? I think there's a lot of confusion. People are like, oh, they're a free birth midwifery school. I'm like, that makes no sense. Like, do what you want. I've had my own free births, but we are not a free birth midwifery school. I don't know what that means. Like, midwives are not in attendance at free birth, so makes no sense. Um, but yeah, that's like one point of contention. And then the other, I suppose, the obvious one would be I did work as a licensed midwife for a couple of years, went through the CPM process myself, and ended up giving the license back to the state of Arizona. And then I think 2 years ago, gave the CPM credential back just because I wasn't in alignment in either case with the broader structure of what that meant for me and what that means for midwives. I'm just not in agreement with it. So, why would I sign my name to it? But I wasn't as aware of those things back when I agreed to it. And, that's part of our mission, I think, is spreading more awareness and transparency around the system of what I think is essentially medicalized midwifery. It's not bad, but I think we need to call it what it is and start creating new options for the new world that we live in. Because, the medical system is really old world. Many of us have been there, done that. But midwifery, too, I think, needs some kind of redreaming, rebuilding in all the ways that it's not working for midwives, and it's not working for women all the time either.
Yeah, I would say it's really not working. I just happened to scan the very well populated Midwives Anonymous Facebook page. It's like
Oh,
six.
I have heard about this. I am not on Facebook.
Oh yeah, well, it's a collection of midwives from all over the country and all over the world, and so it's a very diverse group.
Hmm.
But like, I don't know, like the last 10 posts were all some version of I'm burned out, exhausted, overwhelmed, not making enough money. I hate this. How do I get out?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And it's really a crisis. Like I feel like we are at a bigger touch point than I have seen in my career of 25 years. I mean, the evolution seems to be, I don't know, there definitely seems to be a challenge.
Yeah.
People are
Yeah.
not sustainable. Um, and one of the interesting comments on the Midwives Anonymous was, I'm going to go out of business if the other midwife in my community doesn't charge a living wage.
Hmm. Interesting.
And this sort of brought me around to like a subversive theme that's been true of American midwifery, and that is like the privilege that exists in a lot of American midwives, such that people can treat it like a hobby.
Hmm.
They don't have to make a living wage because they're supported in other ways. And of course, this challenge is like midwifery wasn't a business, right? It was a calling. It was a priesthood. It was a
Hmm.
trade. Like throughout the ages, it was many things. Now, of course, it has to be a business in order to support its midwives, unless there's enough privilege or there's enough resources that they can make it donation-based service. And there are only certain people who are able to do that. So like, I don't know, I feel like we as a profession are also grappling with this reality of like, how do we make it sustainable and equitable, while at the same time all of the families that we want to serve, or most of the families we want to serve, are in payer systems that don't pay midwives, or are struggling with inflation such to the extent that they have no income to pay midwives. I mean, it just feels like we're at a real inflection point. We're at crisis.
Mhm.
And I wonder, I know midwives reach out to you. I know you were running a school and you're deeply involved in the creation of midwives and their function. What advice are you giving right now? How are you helping people with these challenges?
Right. I hear you. I hear you on all of those. And to be honest, I don't have a magical solution either. I think it's very complicated and there's a lot of depth when we just look at, cultural beliefs even around money or responsibility. I think those are two. You mentioned the money piece, but the other is, and there's probably more. Responsibility is a huge piece. I think midwifery becoming a profession in a more negative sense has changed what this role really is, and I experienced it myself about a year and a half ago, had like a really awful birth situation. I had never been in that situation ever where the parents just like kind of lost their minds and wanted to blame me for all things. And I realized just how bad it is, because here we are caring for what we think is sort of like the best of the best, people that get it. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people don't get it that midwives are being held responsible for things that are not their responsibility. And it's a delicate conversation because we still need skill and we still need training. And, given that, right, like we're all doing the best we can do. So I think that's a piece because essentially midwifery isn't valued as the archetype that I think it probably was at one point. So when it was more of this archetypal role, the midwife handled birth and death, right? Like she was in her community, and I'm assuming, and I could be wrong, was supported by that community in ways. So that's another piece is like these midwives, and I was one until not very long ago, or you're sort of out there on your own. You're just sort of this island, and people say they want that, and you're busy, but there isn't like a real community, like grounded belief system in place to protect and value what we do. So, what that's what I tell people is let's talk about this. And let's each within ourselves maybe try to dissect some of that and pull it apart. But it's a collective thing that I think it's going to still take a while for us to find our way out of. But starting to have these conversations like this one is so great to be like, this isn't working. And here are your reasons why and my reasons why. And how do we want this to look? How do we want this to feel? Because I think it is dying. I think midwifery, as we sort of know it, isn't going to last too many more years/generations.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. I've been lamenting that for a number of years now. Midwifery, as it was in the 70s, is gone. And part of that is because of the changing environment and ecosystem, which is a whole nother conversation.
Right.
Um, but I think this version of midwifery is also is disappearing, replaced primarily by this academicization and certification
Yeah.
process. And you mentioned that you let go of your license and your CPM.
Yeah.
I have also just let go of my CPM, and I'm wondering if you're willing to have a conversation about why that's not in alignment
Oh,
anymore.
totally.
Yeah. You want to start us off?
Well, it was a long time coming. And to be honest, when I gave my state license back in 2012 or 13, I only held on to the CPM because I wasn't quite sure. Like I thought, why throw the baby out with the bathwater? Uh, at the moment, this certification isn't really restricting me. So, let's just be patient here with this and see where it goes. And I learned a lot in those whatever number of years that was, 10 years. I had many families come, obviously. I was working in Sedona, Arizona at the time still, and I was the community midwife. And people started to seek out me. And, I think generally someone without a license for all the reasons that some families are choosing that. And so, long story short, I just started to see that like the CPM wasn't really serving me. It was just I was paying them money and I was jumping through the hoops, but no one actually cared. And I think that's really interesting, especially as we have midwifery students coming into our school or looking at our school as prospective students. That's often a question is like, well, what if I don't have that? And it's coming from this like fear sort of mentality, I think, a lot of the time, right? It's like, oh, I want to fit in. And if that's the standard, I don't want to be left behind, which I totally get. But just saying that my experience was that families didn't actually care, didn't even know what it meant. It didn't receive a lot of validation from anybody, right? In the medical world, they don't care. So it just started to feel like it was energy I didn't need to be spending. And then as, that organization, NARM, has gotten sort of stronger in the ways that it's regulating, even here in Hawaii, that whole story. It's just become more distasteful to me as the years go by because I don't think it's a very high standard anyway. I think it's a pretty elementary credential. I mean, it's not hard to get one. So there's that. And I could go on, but I'll give you a chance here.
Yeah, well, that definitely hit a nerve for me. That's probably the primary reason I let go is because I am an educator, and I had kept it, even though I haven't been practicing in the United States for like 7 years, but I had kept it because I wanted to be a preceptor to help students move forward and get the quality education and support that journey. And I just couldn't, in good faith, continue to represent that organization
Yeah.
because it's a garbage credential. And I
Yeah.
know that this is going to like really piss off some people.
Oh, go for
But
it.
um, but it's actually laughable. And it has
Yeah.
been given so many opportunities to evolve with the times and has failed every time. It does not even meet the International Confederation of Midwives standards for education. That's where the bridge certificate came around. And it turns out what I think the medical world continues to believe is substandard care. And I'm hard pressed to defend that. I,
Right.
I mean, when I have traveled around the United States, I have literally taught thousands of American midwives. And I am astounded at the lack of knowledge in
Hmm.
some of the places I go. And this is, I think, the biggest complaint I have with the norm credential is that it is not a national degree. It is entirely regionally dependent. It is entirely apprenticeship. And this is a sticky place because I don't believe in the formulaic academicization of it either. But
Right.
there should be an established baseline education, and that is NARM is not doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, aside from the people who are there are no checks and balances. So there's students who are being abused and hazed and discriminated against, and then there are students who are graduating without ever having caught a baby because their midwife will just sign anything. Like all these are problems. But even the folks who jump through the hoops and catch the 25 babies, they're not ready for practice.
Right.
And my first sort of effort to try to address this was like, I wrote my master's thesis on creating an interprofessional postgraduate clinical residency program, because there was this gap that they weren't actually competent in independent practice most of the time. The ones that graduated and were is because they had some pre-existing level of knowledge. They were already nurses. They had attended 250 births as a doula.
Right.
They had been catching babies illegally and then made themselves legal, like whatever. Like there was some precedent that brought them to a level where when they graduated, it was just like that final tick box, and they had the scope and the skill. But I would say so many midwives are not really ready. And I know that will really offend and shock and maybe piss people off. But you can look at the statistics and you can look at the classes. And I don't know. I would say this was the biggest reason for me.
Yes, I'm with you. And I'm sure you see that to even a higher degree than I'm aware of with all the clinical training you do. And I think that is very upsetting and disturbing. Kind of, on the other side of like a holistic education, I'll add that attention to one's own self, in sort of like the growth way is a huge part of becoming a midwife. And I think even a school like ours, where we're trying really hard to have that as part of the curriculum, it's necessary. Like it's not optional. You have to work on your shit. You have to look at your trauma, and we're trying to do more. So the fact that that's completely missing is, I think it's embarrassing, really, because not only are we creating midwives that are perhaps unskilled with their hands, there's an immaturity that I know comes with practice, but there's also, that's not being addressed, as well as the emotional and spiritual aspects to this. And, you can't have one without the other, I don't think. I'm not saying that skills are everything. And I'm not saying, only having spiritual awareness and not having any skills. Like we need both parts. We need all the parts. So, we're all on our own journey to figure that out, but I don't agree. I don't agree how they're doing it. And I very much agree with what you're saying. People aren't ready, and it's not just their hands, it's their whole selves to be in this work and, to figure it out and to have things happen and to be able to recover and grow from that. It does take a lot of work. I feel like that's actually midwifery, and nobody told me that. I was all about
Nobody
the
told
checks,
me that.
and
Yeah.
no one told me that. I thought it was just, knowing what I needed to know and caring for women and getting experience and being able to handle a hemorrhage, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Mm-hmm.
80% everything else.
Totally. There's that great quote from Gregory White's book in 1950, Emergency Childbirth. And he says, any reasonably intelligent 8-year-old can catch a baby. That's not the work, right? Yeah.
It's not the work.
All the other stuff. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate this. It is a thing to be on the outside, to be on the border of anything. And midwifery is already a border town. So right. Then
we're the fringe of the fringe here.
Yeah. You and I exist out here in the phalanges or whatever. Out there. Well, it's a pleasure to connect around that. I wanted to ask you about I think it was you. I'm not sure actually. Let me fact check for you. There is some like movement around this. It's not like a business type. It's like a private club or something. The first time I heard about it was in relation to raw milk clubs.
Right. Yeah.
Like
I know what you mean.
Get a portion of the cow and then everyone could like be underneath the laws of the state.
Yeah.
And I remember that is happening with some midwifery practices. Did that originate from you?
Yeah. So the structure itself, of course, did not originate with me, but I'm pretty sure that I was the first midwife to like go out there and try it. And that was, like I said, 12 years ago. So yeah, that came about when I gave back my license. And it was a soul searching time, obviously, because I gave the license back in a mandatory licensing state, which was Arizona. And I said to myself, I might not ever do this again. Like, it's not going to work for me to do it this way because my soul is literally dying. So, maybe I'm done. And then, of course, the universe delivered this information which, 12 years later, I'm so glad to see it being talked about and all of that. I'm not an expert, like in the sense of all the legalities, to be honest. I know what I know, and I know that it has felt good for me to do things that way. And I'll also say that, it's not a magic bullet. It's again more about that inner work one might do around these sort of provoking topics, like
Mm.
persecution, prosecution, that kind of thing. I think that work has to be done, and maybe we never stop doing it. And the PMA is simply sort of an external result, I think, of doing that. So, in other words, I wouldn't say just slap one on and you're good to go. That was not my path. But that said, I did work in Arizona for 10 years under a PMA in a mandatory licensed state, and they left me alone. And they knew me very well because I had been in legal battle with them for 2 years. They just left me alone. And, there's a testament to it, but it can look lots of different ways. It's made sense for me, though.
Yeah. I think it's been challenged a few times, though. There was a midwife in Nebraska, I think, that had to go through that challenge. Do you know the outcome?
Yeah. And that's, again, I don't feel like I should speak about the intricacies in a sense. There's a lot more to it than just getting a PMA and having your clients sign paperwork. It
Yeah.
is actually like a whole system reset. So, I technically am not part of the matrix. Like my husband and I have done the work to remove ourselves from that. So for us, a PMA is just our normal life. That's like our own personal, structure for our life. So, midwives that are using it, it's cool, but also if they don't really understand it and that's not really how they're living, if push does come to shove, yeah, then it's sort of a
It's
grab bag. You're not, yeah, you don't know what you're going to get. And even entering the legal system is a questionable choice because you're actually not even working inside of that system. So yeah, it's a little confusing.
well, we're out here on the real edge.
We're on the edge.
But yeah, birth certificates and straw men, and I'm sure we're right there on all all the details. Yeah, it does all. One does bleed into the other, doesn't it? I mean, living in this corporatocracy, you know, if you want to get, like you said, unplugged from the matrix, you actually have to become an expert in law and finance and all these other pieces, and it's quite a system. That's all. I guess that's all I can say.
It is quite a system. And again, I would not profess to be any sort of expert. My husband knows a lot. He spends a lot of time studying and consulting with people. It's just like his passion. It's his reason, one of his reasons for being here on this planet. So I can't take credit for any of that, but I have benefited from it. And, to just put it broadly, as far as like this whole sovereign thing, what does that really mean? People can relate to birth, right? Like, what does that mean? It means like I make decisions for myself and my baby and my body. So I think it's not a far stretch to imagine how we might do that for ourselves when that's what we're professing we want for mothers and babies, at least here in this country, in this structure, right? So they really do go together.
Yeah, they do. Well, and
Mhm.
society has just gone so far from that ideal.
Right.
Like, it's kind of no wonder that people enter a hospital system and have no agency or sovereignty over their body, because actually, when you look at society, you need a license to fish. Like you don't have sovereignty over yourself or your land. You have all of these societally driven control mechanisms, and when you really start digging into it, it's quite alarming. We're living in a matrix, and
It is.
yep.
It is.
And yet not everyone wants to or is willing to investigate that or look into that, and the mainstream media definitely brands this conspiracy theories and all those things. Well, speaking of which, we're entering even more bizarre new realities with the advent of AI, and we're very close to singularity, where it's supposed to, be sentinel intelligence past human realities. What does this mean for you in your practice? What do you think about this new reality that's coming down?
You mean as far as like AI, in what way? I might be a little
Well,
removed from some of this. You have to fill me in.
all the ways. Universal basic income has been proposed because of the amount of jobs that will be displaced because of AI. And then with UBI comes probably the social credit score. And this is where all the smart cities are building. Lahaina is one that's been
Right.
promoted, smart city.
Sure.
And this obviously will, in the long term, make or break midwifery, because if it's not an accepted part of society when this transition comes, it won't probably ever be. This is one of the sort of long term dystopian realities I keep thinking about.
Yeah.
What is going to happen here? But then there's
Yeah.
even more immediate worries, and that is like the quality of your charting and your policy and procedures impacts the level of liability that you carry or how you can defend yourself. And AI is becoming integrated in all those areas. Clients have unprecedented access to information, but without any actual wisdom. I mean, that's
Sure.
always been true with the internet, but now I feel like it's even scarier because AI is interpreting life for us essentially. And I think it has the potential to really just like impact everything about society, but especially medicine, because it's being implemented more and more in decision making, diagnostics. And my worry has always been that, with this incredibly lightning speed pattern recognition, that it will somehow prove midwives to be wrong lots of times. That's because the outcome is only as good as the input, right? So if it doesn't have any midwifery data, it won't spit out midwifery conclusions. So I've been sort of toying with the idea of like, how do we use AI in midwifery? How do we actually become early adopters so that it is a part of the conversation from the beginning? But of course, I'm not a tech person at all. I'm just sort of riding the wave of like, what's next? And I wonder if you think about this at all.
I don't.
How freeing, how wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I choose to live in somewhat of a bubble, but let me explain because, it's not that I don't appreciate that or think that. I think there's a lot about this world that is super concerning and disturbing and depressing, but I don't feel like I'm here to fix the systems. And, even if there's sort of new and upcoming systems within the old system, it's still an old system built on fear and power and, disease and death, to be honest. So I won't put my life force into that. I really do think I'm here to do whatever's next, which I'm not saying is better because actually half the time people don't know what you're talking about at all. But that's just why I was put here. So I'm more concerned with how do we create midwives? And maybe that's not even the word at some point if that becomes, so old grid that we're so stuck in it, which I think that's a whole conversation. Sometimes I don't even use the word. I don't know what to use. But until we realize what midwifery is meant to be, and that's a huge, complicated conversation because it also involves women and where they're at and what they want. Essentially, I think a midwife will be best used in this like new world as a spiritual guide. And again, I'm not saying we don't need skills and all of that, but this focus on the old model where let's be honest, we can do no right. And you just said it. You're like, it's getting worse for midwives. We won't ever be right. Like, it's just not a model I can participate in trying to change. It's like a sinking fucking ship. And I don't want to go down on that, and I don't know if the work I'm doing will make a difference in my lifetime, but I just have to do it.
Yeah.
So again, I don't think it's bad or wrong. We're each here to do what we are here to do. And just for me, it's not that. So I hate AI. I will go out of my way to not use it. I think it's gross and weird. And, what else can I do in a sense, but keep going. Right?
Yeah, we are definitely at like sometimes I think with the Trump's election in 2016, we like jump timelines.
Yeah.
like on a totally different
Yeah.
something changed so irrevocably around that time frame that I'm like, this is not the reality I remember.
Right. And then it happened again, I think, with COVID,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like, and
totally.
you put it, that's like so perfect. And that's how my mind works in a way. I'm just like, yeah, we jump timelines and we can jump them. And it's just a matter of choice sometimes. And again, like our karma and why we're here. But yeah, that feels like real to me. Like that kind of talk is real to me.
I know, but Most people are like, la, 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 la.
Right. And,
Those
that's
aren't my
okay.
people, right? Those
Yeah.
aren't my people. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's okay. I mean, that's okay. But each of us can reinforce whatever the reality is we believe in. So it's not right or wrong, but every time, we work on a thing or say a thing or focus on a thing, we are putting energy towards that. So it's just being mindful of that. Like, is that really where you want to put it? Is that where your strengths are? Are you going to make a difference there? And good for you if you are. Totally, you should go do it. It's just not
Definitely.
me.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about sovereignty because this is one of my favorite words as well. And I think it is thrown around a little bit. And I would love to go back to the definition you shared before and really tease that apart. So would you share again the definition that you came up with?
Well, the definition I shared initially was actually for IndieBirth. So I don't know if you meant
Okay.
that one, but yeah, sovereignty is interesting. I will say Margot and I have a show on Rumble called Midwives Gone Wild. That's really fun to do. She and I do it together. And
Awesome.
one of our last episodes was on sovereignty and just like the way this has become like a hashtag. And I don't know if anybody knows what it means. I don't know if I know what it means, but I think we're seeing it thrown around and it's really cool and hip and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's a buzzword for
Yeah.
sure, the way
Mhm.
natural or water birth used to be.
Yeah.
And I there's some sort of companion words that I feel like I like better.
Yeah.
And so I lean into agency. I feel like that is an important word.
I like that.
And self authority. I feel like authority is another important word.
Yeah. I like
Uh,
self-authority.
And I feel like this conversation about agency or authority or sovereignty, there needs to be like another conversation below it because in order to have agency over your own life or self authority, you also have to have the concept that you are powerful, that you are knowing, that you have
Hmm.
the concept of who you are and what you even want.
Hmm.
And I would say to me, when I reflect and this, we're out here on the edge, when I reflect in this back in, I would say, this is probably the biggest wound of the capitalistic patriarchy is that women predominantly, but most of society has been taught that they don't have their own agency or their own authority or their own sovereignty.
Yeah, of course.
And so when we're talking about midwifery care or free birth or, sovereignty in birth, oftentimes people don't know what it means because they've never actually felt it in their own body.
Yeah.
And to me, this is what is so powerful about unassisted birth or free birth or whatever the title is these days, is that if we take the, medical risk out of the conversation and we just stay in the spiritual front of it, this is one of the only places where we can reclaim that experience, that body knowing. And I was one of those people, one of those crazy people. I think you were too. Left the system for your own birth. But there are those of us who are sort of out here, like fringe of the fringe, and you can call back into the group and be like, this is possible, but they can't hear you because they don't have any concept of what self authority is. And you see this too?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the main issue, so to speak. Like, how can you create power in a collective when there is no felt sensation or experience of power? And perhaps even going back in the lineage, there is no felt sense of power. You're exactly right. So it's become this like falsified thing. And I think the sovereign sort of like buzzword can hit some of that. It's just like, do these things, check them off the list, or like post this thing or sign this thing, and suddenly you're sovereign when it's an inner process, which is what you're saying. It's an inner journey, and nobody else gets to say how that looks for you or when you get there or when you don't get there. And actually, with the free birth movement, that's one of my absolute pet peeves about it is the location of your birth has
Mhm.
nothing to do with sovereignty unless it does. I mean, there's many women that are completely traumatized and feel whatever which way all inside, but had their baby in their bathroom alone. So I think we need to also stop stop externalizing this whole conversation because it's not doing people or women any favors. And the remembering of what you're saying of like, this is my work to do, is being lost, like with every post like that and every, whatever it
Yeah.
is, sort
Yeah.
of furthers that agenda. But
Yeah.
I think it's ironic because it takes you back to like sort of this, whatever you want to call it, like the system of powerlessness.
Yeah, we're still making decisions within the context that is this society with these set of norms. And so to actually like fully see with the different kaleidoscope, that disengagement, that is what will produce this agency. But it is practically impossible. And as you said, is the roots of all personal growth, inner work. Like that, this is the root of it, right? I oftentimes think like sovereignty has the same distortion that self-care does.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, it's a checklist. It's a
It's
bubble
become
bath.
commercialized,
Right.
actually.
Right. And again, it's just like talk about conspiracy theory. It's
Yeah.
so ironic and like it just like the wheel keeps spinning because people get like further and further away from their own truth, which, I think that's really important to me. Like I care about the world and I care about all these bigger issues, but really all I can work with is myself on any given day at the level that I want to. I can't force other people, like you're saying, to do it. I can't force them to see it. So what choice do I have? I have to face myself in that moment of like even being triggered or cared that nobody wants to do it. Like that's my work, because otherwise it just keeps like holding in on itself and we get further.
Yeah. Yeah. It's ironic. You use the language of sovereignty while getting further and further from it. I teach a class called Boundaries for Birth Workers. And this is my attempt to try to be like, you can make choices that are different than your client wants or than the mainstream. And it is painful. Now, also, I have come to discover through the years of working with midwives and this particular coursework, I think I have a very well-formed concept that 100% of midwives are traumatized.
Yes, I am so with you. I'm so glad we're talking about this.
100%. I have yet to find one who is not suffering CPTSD.
I know.
And most of the origins of that CPTSD are actually family of origin.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you see that too, because it's a really vulnerable place to like be. I mean, I include myself in this as well.
Yeah, no, totally. And
Yeah.
I would say most people are traumatized.
Yes, for sure. Most people are traumatized. And when you like the ACEs was the way to quantify that, the ACEs study. And they found that some 70% of the population has at least one ACE and 25% have at least four. And I think midwives have like 7, like 8. Like
totally.
I think midwives, one of the reasons why community-based midwifery is okay for us is because we are already conditioned to live in the chaos that is on calling.
Exactly. We started with dysregulated nervous systems, many of us. I was a baby in the NICU for a month and a half. I was like bonded to probably lights in a box. So, big stretch there to realize why I initially got into midwifery. But, not everybody sees it that way. We're used to thinking, oh, we want to help women. And I know that's true. Of course, we want to help.
Yeah.
I think all midwives have hearts of service and beautiful people. But I think we do need to look at like why we even get into this work.
I would say I want to interject something there. I actually am not sure all midwives have hearts of service in our
and you may say that.
This is one of my controversial pieces, but actually I think in the fringe is where a lot of personality disorders end up. Is a lot of where
see that too.
Cluster B personalities end up. It's where the traumatized end up. So it may be where the super abusers or dysregulated folks of all stripes end up.
Sure.
And there's no checks and balances and no accountability and like there's that case in Arizona right now.
Right. I know. And yeah, I'm with you. I think I meant it from just like that higher view, it's like I do like to remind myself of that in a sense that everybody is doing the best they can. And of course, that's with exactly what you shared, which is we all have all of this stuff that we come in with and is going on for us. But, in that case, I totally agree. It's like there's just a line that you cross at some point where it's inappropriate to care for people. So
this is what is scary about midwifery from the mainstream medical perspective is there's no accountability. Like, okay, so she can't get a license for more years, but like she's still doing the thing. And there's nobody that can say, or do anything really.
Okay, and that is so interesting to me. I've actually been pondering that
Yeah, I wonder.
because,
I
well,
have
I
been.
don't know if I'm like up to date on that situation, but the way I heard it and the way it sort of like got left in my brain was this is so fascinating. It's also really sad and tragic and all of that, but it's really fascinating from like this midwifery political perspective because here we have this state where midwives are licensed and daddy, the licensing agency, daddy, isn't taking care of this situation. And I think that that is really surprising to me. And aren't people in an uproar? They're like, why aren't they saying, like, well, but she had a license and you're the one that said you wanted to be responsible for midwifery licensing. You wanted to call the shots on that. So, like, where does that happen then? Like, why is there not accountability from that system that said they wanted to be in control? I don't understand.
Absolutely. I mean, those are all good questions. And then there's like another layer to this. And that is like, was that family exercising their sovereignty by choosing a midwife that was not going to offer standard of care? Maybe. I mean, I don't know. This is where it gets really in the weeds, right? This is the Democratic Republican and this is the left right kind of
Oh
like
no.
who's in charge, right? Because this is the seat. This is the juxtaposition of if we truly believe that the agencies exist to keep the public safe, then why aren't they exercising their authority? And conversely, if we believe that people are responsible for their own choices and need to do their own research and make their own decisions, then maybe this is a part of what is acceptable if you believe in sovereign decision making and independent authority.
I mean, I'd love to hear what you think, but I think both are true. And it just sort of depends on your perspective, which, isn't a popular belief all of the time, right? So it's like at the micro level, like, why wasn't the public informed then if this midwife had stuff already going on? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. And if I potentially were a client, it's like you'd want
Yeah.
to know those things. So they weren't really given like full transparency, but they didn't ask or, whatever.
That's the problem though, is the lack of transparency. Yeah.
Yeah. And then like the bigger picture is we're all adults here and everybody on some level, like I don't know how to like totally make it a midwife's fault when we're all adults here and people make their choices for the reasons they do. Like it is very complicated.
It's very complicated. And when you read the case and listen to the story, definitely things were missed from a clinical perspective, in my
Sure.
opinion. I mean, so there was negligence.
Yeah,
And at the same
definitely.
time, how do lay parents make the call about what is appropriate? I mean, this is the juxtaposition of the conversation in all state licensing realities. Are we going to infantilize the parents, or are we going to empower them?
Yeah, that's a really interesting case. I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens there. But ultimately, it's like, yeah, if midwifery is going to be sort of taken by that system,
Yeah.
then I guess they're accountable to not hugely in favor of licensing for all these reasons. It obviously doesn't produce better, smarter midwives. Like that's a
Yeah.
given. I mean,
Yeah.
in my fantasy world, which isn't exactly what you're asking, that's why there isn't licensing or there's a choice. Because at the
Yeah.
end of the day, some midwives still suck or give terrible care no matter what. So if it's like there was more of an even playing field of like, guess what? Newly pregnant mother, like you're completely on your own to figure this out, there would still be issues. But I think people are swindled by these silly letters that come after someone's name, and maybe they don't always do their due diligence that should be done. But, I mean, it just depends. And there's all kinds of people out there calling themselves midwives that aren't midwives and lying to people. So God, it gets really, really complicated and sort of depressing really quick because there's no magic answer when people are being crazy. And I think that's like sort of my final statement is, when it's just crazy and people are like totally out of bounds, none of the structures in place seem to matter. There's just a crazy person being crazy.
Yeah. Fringe of the fringe. So what does that say
Yeah.
about you and me?
I'm crazy. I'm crazy
Crazy.
too, I'm sure. A different kind of crazy because I just have, I guess, different beliefs perhaps, or just different experience and different life path. But I would find it challenging personally to, have like losses in general suck. That's really hard on everyone. I haven't experienced that in my practice as a midwife, luckily, but that would be hard enough, not to mention multiple losses, not to mention what that might do to a community, what that might do to your own support as a midwife. So I'm not judging it. I'm just saying that sounds incredibly hard. And for me, I think I would find something else to do, maybe, because that would feel really hard to me
Yeah. Yeah.
emotionally.
And maybe that's a secondary part of this is the lack of personal accountability. Like if she can't see what she's actually doing, then these are the kind of cases where I think society created checks and balances to try to stop this from happening. But as you point out, that's also not happening. My only thing to say is I believe the father is Parker. And of course, I send my strongest condolences for that experience for him.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we had talked about it on one of our Rumble shows too, and said similar things. Yeah, it's sad. It's for sure sad, and that we do kind of pull these other conversations out. I think is with compassion as best we can, and like for the total birth nerds and all of that are interested in these things. But yeah, it's just sad.
Yeah, it is sad. Well, it has still been a pleasure talking to you, a real pleasure. And I thought we could wrap up today by talking about what you are loving doing right now. What are you involved in right now?
I love that question. I am not attending births, so I am loving my life without a
Yes.
phone attached to me. I am loving being free to do whatever I want with my family whenever I want. And I am loving getting my own like health and nervous system back after many, many years on call. It feels really good. It's really great to feel more grounded, and to make time for conversations like this, for the parts of midwifery that I feel like we don't get the chance to talk about and sort of even work on in this fun way when we're super busy doing the thing. So I am just loving being in Hawaii and being free
What
to
island?
create.
What
I'm on
island?
Oahu.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I got lots of midwife friends there. So if you run into them, give them all my love.
Yeah, I will. I have met a few and they've all been lovely. But to be honest, I've just kind of been in my own little bubble
Mm-hmm.
and not really involved in what's going on. And for the first time, that feels really good.
I love that for you. And I hope
Thank
that
you.
that piece is going to ripple out into the world.
Thank you. I've so loved talking with you.
Thank you, friend. How can people follow you if they would like to on socials?
IndieBirth.org is our main site. IndieBirthMidwiferySchool.org is the school. We still exist on Instagram as IndieBirth, but to be honest, we've made a concerted effort to remove ourselves from socials, actually. So you can find us other ways. I also have a podcast called Taking Back Birth.
Cool.
And yeah, you can find me some way if you'd like to.
Awesome. Thanks, Maryn.
This was so fun to connect with you and do this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, friend.